Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. In this video, we're going to take a continued look at Song for War Mediterranean Theater, the 2 to 4 player operational strategic World War II game coming to Kickstarter in early 2025 from Invicta Rex Games. This video, we're going to take a look at gameplay. Let's jump in and get started. So what we're looking at right now is the entire 54-inch by 31-inch Mediterranean Theater map. Now keep in mind there are two maps on the other side of this in the full version of the game for scenarios, a North Africa scenario and then the Italy scenario. So this is where two of the bigger scenarios happen, but if you get the full version of the game, the other two scenarios are on the other side of these mounted maps here. Gorgeous maps, and usually when you're playing the Mediterranean Theater game, there's stuff going on all over the place here, but that would take a long time to show. So instead, the goal of this video is to show the sequence of play and the combat, and to do that, I've set up a mini scenario down here, a battle for Tobruk. The goal is, can the Axis forces wrest Tobruk away from the British forces, or will the British hold? Let's zoom in, take a look, and fight this battle. So let's take a look at the combat situation as we start out this Axis assault on Tobruk. First up, we can see that the Axis forces, which are yellow for Italian forces, red for German, are in these three areas. The British forces are down here in Tobruk, trying to hang on to Tobruk. Now, for forces in and of themselves, the British have 1 armored unit, 3 infantry units, 2 artillery units, which do have a range factor. They can fire on these cruisers here, a fighter, and then an anti-aircraft unit. The Axis, for their attack, up in Derna, they have Italians providing air cover, anti-aircraft unit protecting Derna here in the base, and here they have artillery, German artillery, 3 infantry units, 2 armored units, and a light transport, which will be able to transport some of these infantry and artillery. We also have an Italian cruiser off the coast. Back in Benghazi, 2 light bombers, a fighter, and then 2 infantry units kind of defending Benghazi. Now, in addition, the British also have just to the east here. So if we look to the east of Tobruk over here, back in Alexandria, the British have 4 infantry units defending here, 2 light bombers and a fighter, which are in range of Tobruk and this area over here. So they can be brought to bear on the battle. And roughly, the Axis plan is to use combined operations, try to get air superiority here by knocking out this anti-aircraft and taking out this British fighter so that their light bombers can come in and perhaps lay waste to some of the ground forces before the Axis move in to Tobruk with their regular ground force assault, their armor, and their potential infantry as well. From the British perspective, they are trying to maintain air superiority if they can, take out this Italian cruiser, and then hopefully hang on for dear life as the Italian and German ground forces move in. To the British benefit, they do have some light bombers and some fighters here that if things go well, they might be able to tilt the air superiority battle in Tobruk, perhaps inflicting damage on the attacking forces or taking out this light cruiser with an air attack. So a lot of possibilities. Let's jump in and get started by taking a look at the sequence of play. The sequence of play is the heart of Song for War Mediterranean Theater. And it's basically these two columns on the right-hand side here. We have movement steps and then battle steps. To explain how it works, in each turn, one side is going to go first. Which side goes first is a little bit dependent upon the turn and the scenario. For our intents and purposes, we're going to have the Axis forces assaulting going first. And what happens is you kind of walk through a turn is, you do movement step 1, and this is where you start in a particular turn. And the only thing that can move in movement step 1 are the units that are designated here. So we're going to move fighters and submarines. Only the Axis are going to move. Any place where they have moved into a British area or an Allied area and they want to instigate combat, we then go through battle steps using all of these units in the places where combat happens. Once that sequence has gone through, it then goes to the Allied turn, and we're going to move the British forces where they get to move their fighters and their submarines. Any place where they have instigated combat, we're going to walk through all the battle steps. That's the first of 6 stages in a turn. We're then going to go down to 2. We're going to move the destroyers, sea transports, heavy bombers, light bombers, air transports, and fighters. Go through the combat steps until we kind of lather, rinse, repeat until we get all the way down to the end of the battle. Now, we might not need to do all of these. We might finish up here on this land movement phase down in here, these 2 phases down in here. But the battle will continue until probably, in this case, we can carry out the entire operation of the assault on Tobruk in 1 turn. So to the point at hand, we're going to start with movement step 1 for the Axis. They can move fighters and submarines. There are no submarines in this scenario, so the Italians and Germans will move their fighters. The left-hand side of the player aid has all of the unit information, to hit information and movement information and armor and etc. and special attack characteristics. So let's see about how we learn about how our fighters can move in battle. To do that, we're going to zero in on the fighter row here. We can see that fighters have a movement of 4 spaces. So let's move the Italian fighters. The Italians have fighters here in Derna, which we're going to have them fly into Tobruk. It's only a distance of 2 away. Likewise, Benghazi are going to fly into Tobruk. The goal here for these Italian fighters, shoot down the British fighter and start to clear the airspace so that the British can be pushed back and the Italians and Axis ground forces can move in. Also, so we can bring in these light bombers without having them worry about damage. Now that the Italians have finished moving, let's walk through our 7 battle steps. The first battle step, if we look at number 1, is anti-aircraft. And so let's check out the capabilities of this British anti-aircraft unit and see what they can do. So to see what the British anti-aircraft unit can do, we want to look down here on this row. Now there's a good bit of information, but it's actually fairly straightforward. And the ones that we really need right now are this box right here, because this tells us the capacity and what type of units anti-aircraft units can fire at. They need a roll of 9 or greater to hit, and they can only hit air units. So our anti-aircraft units can fire at the Italian fighters that are coming in here, and they're going to do white damage, which is indicated by the color on the back of the symbol. So the symbol tells us 3 things. It tells us the units we can hit, it tells us the color in the background is the type of damage we do, which is white, and then the roll that we need on a 12-sided die is 9 or greater. Now you might be wondering, what does the white mean? The white means that's the level of damage that we do. White damage can inflict damage on any unit that has white armor, but it can't on units that have gray armor. Now there are ways to get around that with concentrated fire, but for keeping things simple right now, let's keep it at that level. Now, if we look at the air units that are attacking the Italian fighters, we can see that all air units in the game have a white level of armor. So if we get a roll of 9 on the anti-aircraft fire against one of these fighters, it's going to do white damage against white armor, so that knocks one fighter out. It'll be 1 hit, and this is basically takes 1 white hit to knock out the fighter. So we are going to go back to Tobruk and take a look at the situation. So we can have the anti-aircraft unit fire at one of these Italian fighters. It gets 1 roll. It needs a 9 or better to hit. Oh, that's a good start for the British defending. It hits 1 fighter and takes it out. So Italians lose a fighter in step 1. Let's go to step 2 now. And if we look at the battle chart, we see that what units are activated in step 2 are the fighters. So basically, the British fighters and the Italian fighters are going to attack each other simultaneously. So basically, the Italian fighters now, half of them got wiped out or kind of diverted. The anti-aircraft fire is out of action. They've fired, and now the fighters are engaging with each other. If we look on the fighter chart, we can see that our fighters need a 7 to hit. They can only hit units in the air, and it is white damage. We already know that all the aircraft have white armor, so whichever one hits is going to knock the other one out. Let's roll the Italians first. So they need a 7 or better to hit the British fighter. They get a 12. Ooh. So 12 is a special feature, but it's not going to matter in this battle. The British return their fighter, gets a 3. So the end of that battle, the British fighter does no damage, so we're going to just pull them off because the Italians knocked them out. And at the end of this fighter portion of the turn, the Italians have cleared the airspace, but they have lost one of their fighter units. Let's go down to our 3rd battle step, light bombers, heavy bombers. We have none of them in the battle here, so that's not a factor. Step 4 is destroyers and submarines. No destroyers or submarines in this scenario, so that's out. Now we go down to step 5 in the battle steps, and we can see that it is aircraft carriers, cruisers, battleships, and artillery. Now, we have the Italian cruiser off the coast of Tobruk. However, we have these 2 British artillery units in Tobruk that can fire as well. Both the cruisers and the artillery have a range of 1. So they'll be able to fire against each other. Combat in the same step is all simultaneous. Future Mike jumping into this video to say that this is actually an error. The British artillery cannot fire on the Italian cruiser in this instance, even though the cruiser is within range, because there is a gameplay rule that says units that aren't in an active battle space can't take damage. So this was a gameplay rule that was added to the game. This is the one error that's in the video, and I wanted to put it in here in case you're using this video in the future to help learn the game. So let's check out and see what type of fire the cruiser has and what type of fire these two artillery units have. Let's take a look at cruisers and how it does damage. We can see the designation here of the star means it can damage ground units, and the anchor means it can damage sea units, air units. So that makes sense. It can't fire at units in the air, but it can hit things on the ground and it can hit ships. Now there's two colors and numbers here. We have the white box with an 8 in it, and we have the gray box with an 8 in it as well. That means it's going to roll 2 dice. One is a gray die and one is a white die. We've already seen that the armor level of the unit dictates whether it can be damaged or not. Gray is stronger than whiter, and there are 4 levels in the game: gray, white, purple, and black. And it goes from weakest to strongest. It's white, then gray, then black, and then purple. Purple is very rare. You don't see that too often. But the gray damage roughly is worth 2 hits, 2 white hits. So a cruiser that does a gray hit could take out another cruiser that has gray armor, kind of exchanging that 1 hit, the gray hit for the gray on that gray armored unit. However, a gray hit's also worth 2 white hits, so it could take out 2 destroyers, for example. And so we're going to roll these dice. Let's see how many hits we get firing on the land units here. So the cruiser's going to fire. The artillery, likewise, if we look at that down below, and this is as complicated as it gets basically. This is the entire combat system we're learning right now. We can see the British artillery can fire at land units and sea units. It needs an 8 to hit. It's going to roll 1 gray die. So the British with 2 artillery units are going to roll 2 gray dice. The Italians with the cruiser are going to roll a white die and a gray die. Let's do the Italians firing first. So the Italian cruiser opens fire. It needs 8s or greater to hit. It gets a 2 and a 4. Nothing. No damage. The British artillery will return fire on the cruiser. 2 shots with 2 gray dice. They also need 8s to hit. A 5 and a 1. Neither side damages the other. The cruiser and all of the ground units remain as they were. Now we're going to go to step 6 in the battle sequence, as everything that's involved in step 5 has activated. Step 6, we have tanks and infantry. The British have tanks and infantry here, but tanks and infantry can only hit ground units, and there's no Italian ground units or Axis ground units, German ground units in Tobruk yet, so they can't do anything. And then step 7 is sea and air transports unload, but there's nothing there that's there, or we have landing defense or concentrated fire, nothing of which has an impact on this battle step. So we have just completed the Axis movement step 1. Now we're going to go to the British movement step 1 and figure out what they're going to do. They can now move their fighters and their submarines. We don't have any submarines, but they do have a fighter back in Alexandria. So the question is, what do we want to do with this British fighter? Now, if we go into Tobruk, we're going to launch a battle in Tobruk, which means that everything goes. So our anti-aircraft can try to hit that fighter. The fighters are going to fight. The cruisers and the artillery are going to go again. And I think as the British, they have a slight artillery advantage here, I think. So we might want to take advantage of that. And with the anti-aircraft unit against the 1 Italian fighter, let's give it a shot. 1, 2, 3, 4. British are going to instigate another battle in Tobruk. They are trying to defend with enthusiasm. Let's resolve this battle. This is kind of a lather, rinse, repeat of the 7 battle steps from the last turn, and we now know how to do that so we can go a lot faster. The anti-aircraft fires in battle step 1. It's going to try to take out the Italian fighter. Anti-aircraft needs to hit on a 9. It gets a 7, so it misses. Now we go to step 2, which is the fighters. So the British fighters are going to engage the Italian fighters. This is simultaneous, and fighters can only damage other fighters. They need 7s to hit. We roll the British first. They get a 5, they miss. The Italian fighter gets a 10. Oh, the strategy backfiring for the British. The British have lost their Spitfires over, well, the fighter units over Tobruk. Now we go to step 3, light bombers, heavy bombers. There's nothing here. 4 destroyers and submarines, nothing. We go to step 5, which is the cruiser and the artillery units. Let's have the British artillery units fire first, and they're firing on the cruisers at a range of 1. They need 8s or greater to hit. They get a 6. I'm going to call that a 5. It was pretty much on there. Oh, sorry, a 9. That's a 9. So they do get a gray hit, which is actually going to hit the gray armor of the cruiser and take it out. So the cruiser's gone, but it does get to fire simultaneously, it gets a white die and a gray die. It gets a 12 and an 8, which are both hits, and it rolled a 12, which brings us to a special case. Here we can see a lot of the combat explained in detail too. The British artillery got a hit on the cruiser. It was gray level damage, and the cruiser has gray armor. So one gray hit takes out one gray armor. The cruiser has been sunk. Let's talk a little bit now about the cruiser's roll, because this is very interesting. So it hits on the 8, so we know it does 1 white damage. It also hit on the 8 for the gray die by rolling a 12, but it has this kind of power up arrow. And that means if you roll a 12 on a hit, it increases the level of damage from gray up to black. And that means we have to look at this order of casualties kind of way to kind of determine what happens. But basically it's worth a double damage hit. It's a critical hit type of thing. So let's figure out what the cruiser's hits mean, especially with this gray 12. So the white die is easy, right? That's an 8 and it hit, and so it does a white level of damage. Now the gray die, which is a 12, hits, and you might think, oh, okay, it does this gray level of damage. But anytime you roll a 12 that one of those power-up units have, and there's like 5 or 6 of them in the game, it does a double damage. So instead of a gray level hit of damage, which could be taken as white or gray damage, it does a black level hit of damage. Now, in the game, we haven't really mentioned this yet, but if there's multiple targets that the attacker could hit, the defender gets to take the damage the way they would like. So that's why this distribution becomes important, because the British have a choice as to how they would like to take these casualties. They could take it as 1 white level damage and 3 other white level damage for a total of 4 white units destroyed, or it could take 2 gray units and 1 white unit, or if it had a black defensive unit, which it does not, it could take a black defensive unit and a gray unit. So considering that we have 2 grays and 1 white, or 3 whites and 1 white, 4 whites, we get to kind of think about how we want to distribute this damage over the British as the defender. Let's go do that. And just to help us out, to kind of keep this in perspective, tanks and artillery are gray level units. So each one of those is with 1 hit. Infantry and anti-aircraft units on the ground, these are the British defensive possibilities here, are white level damage. So let's figure out how we're going to take these hits. And also, before we start out, the only defensive unit that could be hit for the Italians was the cruiser with the artillery. So the artillery took the cruiser out. It's now out of the battle. And we could take all of our infantry and anti-aircraft and leave the artillery and the tanks. A lot of different things we could do to equal this damage here. I want to keep both the armor and the anti-aircraft in battle here, because we know the Italian light bombers are coming, so I want the anti-aircraft capacity to still stay in the game. Because the ship off the coast here, the cruiser, is knocked out, let's take our 2 artillery out as to equal the 2 gray hits. That was the double damage gray hit from the cruiser. And then let's take out 1 infantry to accommodate that white hit. Now the British defense here, greatly weakened. They've lost, but we've still got armor, anti-aircraft, and a couple of infantry units here. So hopefully this will be enough to hold on, but things have surely tilted in the Italian and Germans' favor with that pretty deadly barrage there from the cruiser, at a great cost, though, I must admit, to the Italians. So with the British movement step 1 complete, now it's time to go for the second movement step. This involves, we're going back to the Axis forces, destroyers, ship transports, air transports, heavy bombers, light bombers, and fighters again. We can see that the only thing we have in this step available, actually, for the Italians are these light bombers, but we definitely want to bring them up to see if we can inflict further damage on Tobruk here. So now that we've moved everything in this stage, it's time to go to the battle steps. We are going to start with the British anti-aircraft fire, which has yet to be knocked out. Recalling from our previous step, we know that they need a 9 to hit, and they get a 6. Push that down. They get a 6, which is another miss. This anti-aircraft fire being totally unhelpful to the British cause. Now we go to the fighters for step 2, but there's nothing for the fighters to hit because there's no other air units in the area. So now we go to the third battle step, which is light bombers and heavy bombers. This is where the 2 Italian light bombers can come into play. If we look at the air combat informational chart for light bombers, we can see that it's split up into two. One, the top white part is actually when they are defending against fighters that are attacking them. The bottom part is the attack part, and that is for when you're bombing units like this. We can see they can hit sea or land units. They need to hit on an 8 or above, and they have a gray die, which is quite powerful if one of these hits. We have 2 of them, so we'll roll 2 gray dice. Get a 6 and a 5, no hits for the Italians. So the light bombers have been ineffective here. Now we can go down to every other step here, but we notice that there's nothing left to do. The ground forces can't hit the air forces, and the air forces have already gone. So that actually walks us through every one of the battle steps in this second movement step for the Axis forces. So that brings us to the end of that. It's time to go for the Allied second movement step, where they can move their light bombers. The light bombers have a number of options. We could move them up into Tobruk, but this would trigger an attack by the fighters. We could fire anti-aircraft as the British, but if the light bombers, which in most likelihood would survive, the light bombers could then bomb the British ground troops here again, which could be devastating. We can't quite reach, with the light bombers, we can't reach Derna here. It's out of range of 5, so we can't directly bomb the ground forces that the Axis are preparing to attack Tobruk. But one thing they can do is move 1, 2, 3, 4 and move into this space in between. And that's going to create a problem for the Axis because they don't have the movement to go around it, so they're going to have to push through this contested space, which is going to give the light bombers a chance to bomb them as they go through. So that's the British response with the light bombers. That triggers no battle in this round, so we're going to go to movement step 3, which is really all the sea units, as we can see in the box up here. And there are no sea units left. The cruiser that was involved in this little mini scenario has been wiped out. So we move down now to the Axis step 4. Anti-aircraft units, artillery, light transport, tanks, and infantry. And it is time for the Axis and Italian forces to launch an attack on Tobruk. Let's take a look at the movement here of the different forces involved. If we look here, we can see that our tanks have a movement of 3, so they're going to be no problem going straight into Tobruk. Anti-air has a movement of 2. Artillery has a movement of 2 and 0, but if our artillery moves, it can't fire, so we'll probably just move them up, but they won't be able to participate in the battle. We do have a light transport, which can move 3, and it can also carry this infantry that moves 1. One of the fast-moving aspects of this game is that you can load units onto a transport, move them, and unload them and participate in the battle on the same turn. So that's what we're going to do with the Axis ground forces here. Put them on that light transport, move everybody up, try to push through the desert square where the light bombers are going to harass us and get into Tobruk. So let's do that. So let's load this Axis force up and see if we can get them to Tobruk. To designate transport, we're going to put the infantry underneath the light transport. So the infantry is loaded up on the transport. We're now going to try to push through this desert space here. So to do that, we'll move everything up first here, 1 square. Everything else can make it there. Artillery, anti-aircraft, and then the tanks here have a movement of 2. And now it's time for the British bombers to do their defensive. They get 1 free roll as the Axis attack force here tries to push through their airspace. So the Royal Air Force, hoping for a good day, we get 2 gray dice rolls here with them, and here we go. It is a glorious day for the Royal Air Force, an 8 and a 12. So if you recall from the 12 roll, from the cruiser, the 12 is basically a double damage. It elevates that gray hit up 1 level to a black hit. So the Royal Air Force, in essence here, with this 12, does 2 gray hits, and the 8 here does 1 gray hit. This creates huge problems for the Axis forces. Like, tanks are gray, artilleries are also gray. They need to take out 3 gray hits, or they could take the light transport and the artillery and leave 1. But if they knock the transport out, the infantry's not going to make it to Tobruk. Oh, devastating losses here inflicted by the Royal Air Force. What a day. The defense of Tobruk could have just hinged on that 1 air interdiction attack here. So for lack of a better plan, we're going to take 3 gray hits. We're going to take the Axis armor out and the Axis artillery out, and everything else now can push through to Tobruk and unload. But this really puts a damper on the Axis attack there. Basically, all of their armor kind of stunted and knocked out before it could get to Tobruk here. I thought it was pretty much automatic that the Axis would get Tobruk based on how things were looking, but now it's anyone's battle. This could go either way. And here we go. All of the Axis forces are in Tobruk. We've got a British armored unit, 2 infantry units, and an anti-aircraft unit defending against this rather large Axis attack here. Let's walk through the battle steps. First up is anti-aircraft. And the Axis anti-aircraft has nothing to shoot at, but the British one does. And we know they hit on a 9. Let's roll for that and see how they do. Oh, a 12 on anti-aircraft. Now, for a 12 on anti-aircraft, with this symbol, there's a special symbol here. This means it's not double damage. It means that instead of the defender picking which thing gets hit, the attacker can pick what thing gets hit. So rather than take out the fighter, we want to take out the light bomber, because that's more threatening here. That's a huge hit for the British anti-aircraft to knock out that light bomber, because that means instead of 2 gray rolls, the Italians are going to get 1 attack with that bomber. That's the end of the anti-aircraft phase. We go to the fighter phase. The Italian fighters have nothing to do. We go to the light bomber, heavy bomber phase. The Italian light bombers now can make a run, but instead of having 2 light bombers, they only have 1. It's a gray roll. They roll. They get a 3. They miss. That's huge. So now we go down to the C units. There's nothing here. C units there. Artillery can fire, but there is no artillery involved in this. So we go down all the way to step 6, where we have tanks and infantry. This is the ground battle that we've got 3 Axis infantry up here against 2 British infantry and a tank. So let's take a look at this battle. Infantry hits on a roll of 9 with white dice. Tanks hit on a gray die of 7 or better. Tanks more powerful. Let's have the defenders fire first, although all casualties will be taken simultaneously. This could go either way, but the British have swung a slight advantage in their favor here. So let's roll for the British tank on the gray and the 2 infantry on the white. We get a white 9, a gray 1, and a white 5. That's 1 white hit. So we know that the Axis will have to take off 1 white level armored unit. Now, the Axis infantry have pushed forward to the outskirts of Tobruk. They get 3 white rolls here. A 7, a 7, and a 1. They hit nothing. Now, what we can do is the Axis, we get to pick our defensive unit. Let's take the light transport, because that is only worth 1 armor, and that's going to give us, which has no firepower. So we'll just take off the weakest unit there for the Axis forces. That finishes step 6 of the battle here. Now we go down to step 7. There's nothing, concentrated fire. Everything is over here. And now we go to the end of the Axis step 4. We go to the Allied step 4, where they have the option to move their ground units. And the question is, what do we want to do with them? So for the sake of story, let's say the British are going to stay. They're not going to retreat, and they are going to declare a battle in Tobruk to continue the fighting. They've pushed a little bit of their advantage. They're feeling pretty fortunate here. So now we go to battle step 1 of movement step 4, the Allied side. We're going to walk through the steps again. Anti-aircraft fires first. The Axis has nothing to fire at. The British anti-aircraft, however, has targets, the fighters and the light bombers, and they fire. Oh! This anti-aircraft unit putting on a show. So a 9 is a hit. Now, this time, unlike the 12 they rolled last time, the defender gets to pick. So we are not going to take the light bomber. We're going to take the fighter out instead. That'll leave this light bomber a chance to make a run, which is the next step that we go. Next step is fighters, but there's nothing here. So we're down to battle step 3, light bombers and heavy bombers. So now the light bomber can try to hit the British ground units. So as we've seen before, the light bomber needs an 8 or greater to hit. A 5, it misses. So no damage done by the light bomber. That's unfortunate. That would have been a nice hit that could have taken out that armor or both infantry. The Axis attack is starting to flounder here. So as we go down to the next stage, we've got step 4 is submarines and destroyers. There's none of that here. Step 5 is artillery and sea naval units, but none of that. So we go all the way down to jump down to step 6, where we have infantry and armor. And then also the Axis infantry can go. So let's see what the British armor can do. One sec, I realized this somehow got flipped over by accident. It's an infantry unit, not an anti-aircraft unit. So our British, we'll start with the British tanks and infantry. They are going to fire. Oh, British tanks with the 12. That's one of those double damage hits. So that's the equivalent of, you can take it as 1 gray, but the Italians and Axis don't have any gray here, so they could take it as 3 whites, because it's a black hit. So we'll take the 2 infantry and the anti-aircraft unit off as casualties. But before that happens, because the combat is simultaneous, the Italian infantry get a chance to go. They need 9s to hit. Oof, they get a 9, a 3, and a 5. So that's 1 hit. We'll take off a British infantry unit, because that's white armor damage. And that leaves not much left at all of the Axis attack here. Oh, that was a pretty crippling defense here by the British. That British armor putting on a show. And with that, we come to the end of these battle steps. Battle step 7 doesn't have anything that applies at the moment. So that's the Axis step 4. We now shift in the turn to the Allied step 4. And the question is, do the Allies want to stay here? I think with the numbers tilting the way they are, they're certainly not going to leave Tobruk, and they're going to declare a battle here. So once again, we walk through the battle steps. We're going to go through the anti-aircraft fire first. It would be nice for the British to take down this light bomber. They need a 9 or greater. Oh my goodness. This anti-aircraft has fired 3 times, taken out the light bomber, and that's pretty much it for that. Now, with that step done, we go to step 2, which is fighters. There's nothing. The light bomber and heavy bombers is step 3, but that's been wiped out. No destroyers or ships, so we skip through steps 4, and no artillery, so 5 is done. And we come to step 6 again. This time it is the lone German infantry unit against the British tank and the British infantry. And let's see how this turns out. We will have the Axis as defenders here. We'll fire first, so let's see how they do. They get a 3. They fail. The Allies will go next. The armor only needs a 7 to hit, and the infantry needs a 9 here to hit. There it is. The 7. Oh, they both hit. The 7 and the 11, doing 3 hits of damage, a white and a gray, and this is only a white unit. So with that, Tobruk has held. There's nothing left to do for combat steps. As we go to step, we can kind of round through step 5. Now, that's the end, basically, end of the combat here in this zone. Of course, there's no opponents left, and the British have held Tobruk. For the sake of finishing out the turn, I did move this infantry up in the last one turn. We're going to go now to step 5, which is ground units and infantry, and it's the Axis first. We're going to have the infantry move up here into Derna. And then there's no battles triggered. No battles triggered by this. So that takes care of that stage. Then we go to the British step 5. Now the British conceivably could push up here into Derna and try to attack it with this armor unit, but we're going to have the British for right now hold in Tobruk, and there's no battle triggered there. And then step 6 is a return to base step for the aircraft, and we're going to have the light bombers actually fly now into Tobruk and use that as their air base. That's a viable base for them. And no combat triggered here. All of the Axis air units, the light bombers and the Italian fighters have been wiped out. And with that, we played through the entire turn in this theater. Tobruk holds. I mean, really, these light bombers intercepting the force and wiping out the German tanks in the desert before they ever got to Tobruk really weakened it. But then this anti-aircraft unit, a total hero by taking out the Italian light bombers without them letting them do any damage, and taking out the fighter. I mean, basically cleared the air of Tobruk, and this armored unit putting on some damage. The British putting on what I thought was an unlikely defense early on. I thought for sure after that cruiser, the Italian cruiser, hit the Tobruk defenses pretty hard, I thought Tobruk would certainly fall. But some heroics by the British, and they hold. And with that, we've played through an entire turn of this mini battle. Now, what you want to imagine too is that this battle that we fought really is this one tiny section of the map. And in a full Mediterranean theater game, you've got, you know, 3 or 4 operations like this happening on a turn. There might be something up here in Sicily, something else over Greece and Italy, maybe somewhere else in the desert with the US forces pushing in from the west. At the end of this turn, you know, there's a resupply as you're going to be bringing in new units and perhaps even getting some upgrades to units. You can design a counteroffensive to the attacks that we're taking. You know, what would happen in the next turn with Tobruk? Sure, the British held, but will the Axis forces be able to mount another counterattack? Or is it time for the British to launch an operation of their own? So the game has kind of a sweeping, fast-paced feel to it with a lot of momentum. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. I'll put a link to an impressions and light review video as soon as it's ready. Happy to entertain any questions that you might have. Have a great day.